if you were here today.
Today we're diving into something incredibly personal and emotional. The two songs that reportedly brought one of music's toughest legends to tears. We're talking about Sir Paul McCartney, a man who's seen it all, done it all, and lived through some of the most intense moments in rock history. Paul McCartney has always been known as the optimistic Beatle, the one who kept the band together when things got rocky, the eternal diplomat who could smooth over any conflict. But even legends have their breaking points. And today we're exploring the two songs that allegedly cracked that famous McCartney composure and left him genuinely emotional. Now, we're not talking about your typical sentimental ballads or obvious tearjerkers. These are songs that hit Paul in ways that surprised even him, touching on themes of loss, regret, and the passage of time that resonated so deeply with his own life experiences that he couldn't help but be moved. The first song connects to his relationship with John Lennon and the complicated emotions surrounding their friendship after the Beatles broke up. The second involves a moment of reflection about his own mortality and legacy that caught him completely off guard during a live performance. These aren't just stories about a rock star getting emotional. They're windows into the human side of someone we often put on a pedestal. They show us that even after decades of fame, success, and countless performances, music can still surprise us, still move us in unexpected ways. So grab some tissues, because we're about to explore the vulnerable side of one of music's most beloved figures. These stories will change how you think about Paul McCartney and remind you why music has the power to touch all of us, no matter how famous or successful we become. 1. Here Today. The first song that allegedly brought Paul McCartney to tears isn't actually a song by another artist. It's one of his own compositions, and that makes the story even more powerful. Here Today, from his 1982 album Tug of War, was Paul's musical letter to John Lennon, written in the aftermath of John's tragic death in December 1980. The emotional weight of this song reportedly hit Paul hardest during its first live performance. According to sources close to the McCartney camp, Paul had avoided performing Here Today live for years after writing it, knowing it would be too emotionally challenging. When he finally decided to include it in his set during the 1989 to 1990 World Tour, the results were more overwhelming than anyone expected. The story goes that during a performance in Chicago, Paul was about halfway through the song when the full emotional impact of what he was singing hit him like a freight train. Here was a man publicly working through his grief, his regret, and his love for someone who could never respond. The song's conversational tone, as if Paul was actually talking to John, made the moment even more poignant. Band members from that tour reportedly said Paul's voice started to crack during the second verse, where he addresses the complicated nature of their relationship. The lyrics touch on things left unsaid, arguments that now seemed petty, and the realization that there would never be another chance to make things right. For someone as controlled as Paul McCartney, this public display of vulnerability was unprecedented. What made the moment even more emotional was the audience's reaction. Instead of the usual screaming and cheering, the entire venue fell silent. Fans reportedly began crying along with Paul, creating this incredible shared moment of grief and remembrance. Some witnesses claimed you could hear people in the audience whispering John's name, as if they were all participating in this collective memorial. The song itself represents something deeper than just mourning a lost friend. It's Paul grappling with the fact that their last real conversation had been somewhat strained, that the Beatles' breakup had created distance between them that they never fully bridged before John's death. Industry insiders have noted that Paul carried tremendous guilt about this, wondering if he could have done more to maintain their friendship. During that Chicago performance, Paul reportedly had to pause for nearly 30 seconds to compose himself, something completely out of character for a performer known for his professionalism and stage presence. Concert photographers from that night claim they captured some of the most raw, emotional moments ever seen from McCartney in a live setting. The aftermath of that performance was telling. Paul allegedly told his band backstage that performing Here Today felt like having an actual conversation with John, as if his old songwriting partner was somehow present in the music itself. This spiritual connection to John through song became something Paul would reference in later interviews, though he rarely spoke about that specific emotional breakdown on stage. What's fascinating is how this moment changed Paul's relationship with the song. Rather than avoiding it after such an emotional experience, he began performing it more regularly, as if he'd broken through some kind of barrier. Fellow musicians who've worked with Paul noted that his performances of Here Today became more confident and healing-focused rather than purely grief-stricken. The song also represents Paul's evolution as a songwriter dealing with deeply personal material. Throughout the Beatles' years, even their most introspective songs had a certain distance or universality to them. Here Today was different. It was unmistakably personal, unmistakably about one specific relationship and one specific loss. Music critics have often pointed to this song as a turning point in Paul's solo career, where he stopped trying to recreate Beatles' magic and started processing his own life experiences through music. The emotional breakdown during that Chicago performance wasn't just about missing John. It was about accepting that this chapter of his life was truly over, and finding a way to honor it without being destroyed by it. The lasting impact of this moment extends beyond just Paul's personal healing. Fans who witnessed that performance, either in person or through bootleg recordings that circulated later, often describe it as a life-changing experience. It reminded everyone that behind the fame and the legend was someone dealing with very human emotions of friendship, loss, and regret. 2. The Long and Winding Road. The second song that allegedly brought Paul McCartney to tears might surprise you. It's The Long and Winding Road, but not for the reasons you might expect. This wasn't about the original Beatles recording or its complicated history with Phil Spector's production. Instead, this emotional moment reportedly happened during a very different kind of performance decades later. The story takes place during Paul's 2016 one-on-one tour, specifically during a concert in Liverpool, Paul's hometown. According to multiple sources, including crew members and local music journalists, Paul was performing a stripped-down acoustic version of the song when something unexpected happened that caught him completely off guard. As Paul was singing, a spotlight happened to illuminate a section of the audience where an elderly man was sitting alone, tears streaming down his face. What Paul later discovered was that this man was a longtime fan who had been diagnosed with terminal cancer and had specifically requested this song because it reminded him of his late wife. The fan's daughter had written to Paul's management explaining the situation, but in the chaos of tour logistics, the message hadn't reached Paul before the show. The visual of this man, clearly moved by the music and dealing with his own mortality, reportedly hit Paul with overwhelming force. Here was someone finding comfort in a song Paul had written over 40 years earlier, using it to process grief and loss in ways Paul had never imagined when he first composed it. What made the moment even more powerful was Paul's realization about the song's journey through time. The Long and Winding Road had been written during the Beatles' final sessions, a period filled with tension and uncertainty about the band's future. Paul had originally conceived it as a song about searching and longing, but seeing this fan's reaction made him understand how the song had evolved to mean something much deeper to people. Witnesses from that Liverpool show report that Paul's voice began to waver during the final chorus, and by the song's end, he was visibly emotional. What started as a routine performance of a familiar song had transformed into something much more profound, a moment of connection between artist and audience that transcended the usual concert experience. The aftermath of this performance was particularly meaningful. Paul reportedly asked his security team to arrange a brief meeting with the fan after the show. During their conversation, the man explained how The Long and Winding Road had become his and his wife's song, how they'd played it at their wedding, and how he now listened to it to feel close to her memory. This encounter allegedly changed how Paul thought about his entire catalog of music. In later interviews, he began talking more about how songs take on lives of their own once they leave the artist's hands, how they become part of other people's stories in ways the songwriter never anticipated. The emotional impact of this moment wasn't just about one fan's story. It was about Paul confronting his own legacy and mortality. At 74 years old during that tour, Paul was increasingly aware of his own place in music history and the responsibility that came with having created songs that meant so much to so many people. Band members from that tour noted that Paul's performances became more emotionally invested after the Liverpool show. He began taking longer pauses between songs to really look at his audiences, as if he was seeing them and their individual stories for the first time. The incident also highlighted something beautiful about music's ability to provide comfort during life's most difficult moments. Paul had written, "The long and winding road," during a period of uncertainty and change, never knowing it would someday help a widower cope with loss or provide soundtrack to countless other personal journeys. What's particularly moving about this story is how it represents the circular nature of musical connection. Paul poured his own emotions into writing the song during the Beatles' tumultuous final period, and decades later, those emotions came back to him amplified through a stranger's grief and gratitude. The Liverpool performance became something of a legend among Paul's fans, with many describing it as one of the most emotionally authentic moments they'd ever witnessed from him. It reminded everyone present that beneath the showmanship and professionalism was an artist still capable of being moved by the power of his own creations. These two moments, Paul breaking down during Here Today and being moved by a fan's reaction to The Long and Winding Road, show us something beautiful about the relationship between artists and their music. Even after decades of performing, even after becoming a living legend, Paul McCartney can still be surprised by the emotional power of song. Both stories remind us that music isn't just entertainment. It's a form of communication that can bridge time, heal wounds, and connect us to our deepest emotions. Whether it's Paul working through his grief over John Lennon or connecting with a fan's personal journey, these moments prove that authenticity and vulnerability are what make music truly powerful. The next time you hear a Paul McCartney song, remember these stories. Behind every melody and lyric is a human being who's experienced love, loss, regret, and hope, just like the rest of us. And sometimes those emotions are so powerful that even legends can't help but cry. What do you think about these emotional moments? Have you ever been moved to tears by a Paul McCartney song? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more behind-the-scenes stories from music history.